TeamShares buys small businesses from retiring owners. And so we've now done this. We have 92 companies since launching in 2020. We've got about 500 million of consolidated revenue and 60 million of operating EBITDA. And we focus on a specific niche, and it's companies that are at the point of retirement, traditional, generally non-tech businesses, $500,000 to $5 million of EBITDA.
Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. 6 million small businesses will change hands by 2035. These are contractors, the manufacturers, the companies that keep America running. Nearly 90% are owned by boomers and Gen X, and most will never find a buyer. Michael Brown is on a mission to change that. He's the co-founder and CEO of TeamShares, which buys small businesses from retiring owners. They've acquired more than 90 companies across 30 states with over 500 million in revenue. Mark and I invested in TeamShares back in 2020 when he was just a 5-person team working out of a WeWork. Fast forward to today, TeamShares is preparing to trade on the Nasdaq. In this conversation, we'll talk about how and why Michael built TeamShares, his long-term founder mindset that drives every single decision they make, and why even as they prepare to go public, Michael says they're still just in the first inning. Let's dive right in. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. And with that, welcome my friend Michael. Michael, first of all, I'm so thrilled to have you on, and just such a fan of everything and watching you build now almost an entire decade long. So first, just welcome. So happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Michael, we're going to talk a lot about TeamShares and your future and where you're going and what inning you're in. But first, I want to rewind a bit and just talk a little bit about you. You are one of the most ambitious entrepreneurs. And I, being a mom of 3, I love to go back to your childhood and just get a sense of like, what happened in your childhood? Is there a standout memory, something that helps kind of connect the dots to this ambition that you have?
It's interesting because actually I think there was always sort of like natural expectations in my family, but no one ever really pushed anything. It was sort of self-guided. But I also think I grew up in a bunch of different countries as an expat. And so, I've just kind of always been an outsider to everything. And I think being comfortable as an outsider, it's something that actually when Kevin and Alex and I met, he identified that each of us for different reasons is what's called a third culture kid. So there's like this natural tendency to just be comfortable as an outsider, which sometimes I think can help you see things in different ways.
I really like that. Say more. When you say comfortable as an outsider, give me a few more thoughts on what that means.
Yeah, I mean, so specifically to say like kind of my own experience, right? I think, when I showed up at UCLA, I didn't know anyone, right? There were 4,000. I was theoretically in state because my parents had moved there, but I literally didn't know anyone. Everyone knew dozens of people. I think same thing too. Most of the jobs I was supposed to get out of UCLA were in LA or San Francisco, and I came to New York, and I knew one person, right, who went to high school with. And then same thing, I think when I left to go buy the first business, right? I didn't know anything about construction or electrical. And then when we first started thinking about employee ownership, Kevin and I and Alex went to this conference. And so I didn't know anything, right? So I think it's a thing where if you can balance humility of realizing you don't know anything and be curious, it can be a powerful combination.
So in many ways, what you're really saying is just like comfort with the unknown, comfort being in a place where you don't know anybody, comfort tackling a topic. I do think that inner confidence in places when in fact you don't have clarity is a skill I hope I teach all my children. Okay, I want to go directly into TeamShares. I am so fortunate to have been an early investor. Mark and I both remember really well when we met you, and I'll come back to the famous sentence that you once said to me. But for everyone that's out there listening, can you what is TeamShares? What is it exactly in plain English?
Yeah. So TeamShares buys small businesses from retiring owners. Like that's sort of the most plain way to describe it. As a company, we're what's called a programmatic acquirer, meaning a company and soon to be a public company that sort of routinely acquires small businesses. So we're an acquisitive operating company that keeps buying small businesses and integrates them into our company. And so we've now done this. We have 92 companies since launching in 2020. We've got about 500 million of consolidated revenue and 60 million of operating EBITDA. And we focus on a specific niche, and it's companies that are at the point of retirement, traditional, generally non-tech businesses, $500,000 to $5 million of EBITDA.
One of the things, obviously, that I personally really loved about your business was just, a third of the U.S. economy is the small business economy, right? It's the electrician businesses, the refrigeration companies, and doing right by that part of the economy is just I think, a wonderful thing that I'm thrilled you do. When Mark and I first met you back in 2019 and invested in 2020, what stood out was not that this was an acquisition strategy. It was an attempt to build something much bigger.
Sure.
I remember you had a multi-100-year plan, a 200-year plan, if I remember correctly. Like Michael said super directly as a compliment, you have more ambition than most people I've ever met in my entire life. And as someone who looks for founders like you all day long, what part of your brain was like, let's go make a 200-year plan? Like, where did that come from for the business?
Totally. I mean, look, I think Alex and Kevin and I think for a lot of people, we know people have been with us for 5 years, right? I think a lot of us have found this interesting place of fulfillment that in Japan people call ikigai, which is sort of like your life's work, right? And so it's something that is both ambitious and intellectually interesting, but it is good for the small business economy too, both for these retiring owners that they need to retire, their kids went to college, and there's sort of not a natural successor. And then it's also great for the employees too, because as the business performs, they earn stock in the company too. So it's meant to be a win-win-win. I mean, specifically where that idea came from was, I think, in the early days of being, like a pre-venture founder, right? Just like quitting my job in banking and, buying businesses and running them with Alex. I think we always wanted to build something that was, durable and long lasting. And it was actually, I think it was on my 30th birthday, I was in Hong Kong, and I was just impressed by some of the companies there, like Swire and Jardines Matheson. They started as little trading companies 200 years ago. That was actually where that came from. It's just like, oh wow, like that is wild that Swire, which owns Cathay Pacific and Coca-Cola Asia and half the real estate in Hong Kong, or a lot of it, started as little Scottish traders, right? Sort of 200 years ago in Hong Kong. And that was really inspiring to think that something really large and really durable could start so small. And for us, it was just like at some point along the way, if you start a business, right, any business, you're trying to achieve something financially, and along the way it has to be, I think, to keep wanting to do it, become much more than that. And so it was about wanting to actually contribute and create something that was really productive for the economy and long lasting. That was kind of where that idea came from.
So on that note, let's just take a step back. A lot of people assume when a company is going public, as you will, that most of the value is already being created. Yet
Sure.
You feel vehemently that you're in your early innings. Say more.
Very vehemently. I think it's such a natural, I'm glad you asked the question, and it's such a natural assumption. I mean, I remember, it's funny, going back to the first time I think I ever really thought independently about this it was actually around the time Facebook went public, and I remember reading all these Wall Street Journal articles that like, oh, it's over and this thing's overvalued. I mean, that was like just the beginning. It's the same for Walmart, it's the same for FedEx, the same for like lots of great companies. Like going public is a milestone. The reason, and so if you're building a company that has a huge market opportunity to grow, it's actually it's kind of like graduating from university. It's just kind of the next phase, right? And so that's why I think about the sort of venture phase as a relatively short phase. In our case, it's sort of 6 years, right? And the reason why, sort of TeamShares has, I think, a large opportunity is a couple of things. So first of all, our addressable market, right, is really, really, really large. So, just at, the maximum size of the small business economy in the US is about 6 million companies have employees. 4.5 million are owned by baby boomers or Gen X, and we're starting to buy from kind of the oldest vintages, if you will, of Gen X owners who are kind of approaching sort of, early to mid 50s. So that's a lot of companies, and it's not a TAM that it's not a theoretical TAM, right? We've had 475,000 businesses come into our software since launching it in early 2020. So there's 15,000 every year size qualified. Last year we bought 9 and added 24 million of EBITDA to the company. Right, so I think that we're scratching the surface, and there's this sort of perpetual TAM, and our job is to get to heavy free cash flow positive over the next couple of years, so that we can be self-funding and continue to scale what our mission is. And then I think in the meantime, the way that just like if you were buying a property, right, the way that you finance something is it partially in debt, partially in equity. The equity has historically come from venture rounds, raising capital into the company, right, that is going to go public, right? And then the debt has come from lenders, right? And so there's sort of two dynamics that happen for TeamShares when we go public. Is first of all the availability, and this may take time. It may take a couple of years. I don't know that it's a light switch, but it feels something that we can hopefully earn our way into a lower cost of debt that's available to us in the private markets and just a much bigger market. It happens. Sometimes things take 2 to 3 quarters to put together a debt facility in the private markets. And things happen once you're a seasoned issuer in the public markets in a matter of weeks. It's literally incomparable, right? I think everyone knows the cost bit. I don't know that everyone knows the speed bit. And for us, that's very, very helpful because it's the raw material. Companies and acquisition financing is the raw material. And then on the equity side too, I think we're certainly going public with the intention that the equity we raise will get us to free cash flow positive. And I think there's a fairly good math case there. But if there are opportunities in the future to raise more capital and put it to work, that's available. We also now have stock that we can pay for businesses with. So it gives us a really nice set of tools. And so what's really interesting, I don't want to name example companies, but think of a famous company that goes public, right? That famous company you think of that goes public, generally the act of being public doesn't help actually catalyze the business. Maybe more people know the company now. Maybe there's higher trust in the company because you see their financials. And certainly it's a changing of the guard and opportunity for the shareholders and the employees to have liquidity. But it doesn't actually drive, in most cases, it doesn't actually drive the business model. If you think of us as sort of a factory, a tech-enabled factory, where businesses and capital come in at one side.
This is my favorite part, Michael.
Right. And so like we've always had the businesses. Where we've had shortfalls versus where we've wanted to be is on the capital. And the capital that has come has been slow and unpredictable. And so we have to our job is now to earn the trust of public markets investors, right? Which is, I think, a multi-year journey, but it's a much bigger stage with a totally different cost of capital. And that's really, really exciting to be able to apply that capital to this, what we think is a very productive use for the small to mid-size business economy.
Michael, that's a really great point that very few companies can say, which is that actually going public, the act of going public, it supercharges your business model and the levers that you have to continue to grow quickly. And I just want to hit those numbers again, just because they're so big. So there are 6 million small businesses
with employees. Yep.
With employees that are in the category that you're going after. 475,000 have already come through your system in the last 5 years.
Actively for sale. So that's not just like, hey, there's a business in Chicago. It's like those are businesses that are actively for sale, right?
And you are buying obviously dozens over the years, but you could buy a lot more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And growth very, very quickly.
And that's one of the things that's actually really changed. So back when we met you guys, right, I think the first, sort of in 1Q of 2020, we were closing a company a month, right, with just a couple of us in a WeWork, and 5 of us in total, including me. And so, which in hindsight was a very interesting time to start a company. But I'm
pretty sure we wired right before COVID. Is that right? Do you remember that? Where we made the decision of March of 2020.
And timing's everything.
Timing is everything. That's right.
Yeah, good and bad. But so those first 3 companies, those were about 200,000 of operating profit or EBITDA. As we've got further along, the sort of the rules of our credit facilities and our ability to go get other capital have allowed us to expand the range. And so now we really focus on sort of $500,000 to $5 million. We've gone as big as 7 million of EBITDA. I think the core principle of the model is that the companies need to be, each of them kind of financially immaterial, right? So that you're not betting the farm on a single company. That's the key thing. That's the differentiator versus like sort of large strategic M&A, which has a very tough track record of doing large sort of competitive acquisitions. Those you end up paying so much, and they're premised upon, quote, synergies that don't always come to fruition, whereas we're just buying a great business, transitioning it, handling the transition risk, making sure there's go forward leadership, and then converting the companies to financials, and then building growth on top of that of what's already a great business, but at a very reasonable price that the seller and TeamShares agree on. So
I want to just quickly make sure everyone listening has a really clear sense of these businesses. And I'm going to take some of the sort of stats. On average, these businesses are 30 plus years, right?
Yep.
And it's where an owner, it's their main asset for their family, and they're retiring. And now that you are, again, 7 years into building the company, you've learned a lot. You've done almost 100 transitions across 30 states, 40 plus industries. As you said, over 400 million of combined revenue. What are 1 to 2 things that you now believe about small businesses that you didn't see earlier?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the one thing that comes to mind is we always knew from inception that there was sort of what people call key person risk, that these small founder-owned or second-generation owned businesses, the owners are doing a lot. I mean, honestly, like even if you were to leave Inspire tomorrow, multiple people would need to replace you, right? Just founders are effective and all that stuff.
I hope my husband heard that.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's true, right? And I think it's true of like that sort of even larger companies, right? And so if you dial that back to a smaller company, right? I think that we came to appreciate that it's multiple people to replace a founder, right? And so then we had to work that into our math about what we thought the profit would be going forward. And I think we had to get really good at trying to decipher what type of key person risk there is, because it always exists. That wasn't news to us, right? I think that we just got much better at figuring out what type of key person risk there is. And was it general sort of, big person on campus key person risk, and like maybe not all the processes are written down, and we can handle that. We have a really strong transition playbook to handle that, and we buy businesses that have a great bench of middle managers, and we bring in a president 2 out of 3 times, right? So that we can handle, but it I think that it became very sort of burned into our memories, for cases where we sort of underappreciated how much the owner was driving the revenue. In some cases, they're actually even driving the gross margin or the profit. And so, for competitive reasons, I don't want to spell out exactly how we do that, but we have figured out a repeatable playbook for figuring out which businesses have just kind of general key person risk, and which ones is the owner really driving the revenue and the profit, and that those type we just can't do. So that's probably the main thing that comes to mind. I think the other thing too is that maybe to a surprising amount, I think that the world is focused on industry, and I think we think more about business models. And so I think that there's a lot of different industries out there, 1,000, I don't know how many SIC codes are, I'm sure there are 4,000 or more, right? A lot, right? But I don't know, it may only be a couple dozen business models. And so we try and actually always think in both dimensions too. And so I think that that's served us really well to actually think in business models, and it helps you identify patterns across, so if you see danger in one particular industry, but you say, oh, it's actually really the business model here, then you can say, oh, well, in this industry that actually has the same business model, this is actually a risky business model. So
I like that a lot. Okay, let's take a big step back.
Sure.
We're in inning 1. You're going to go public. Mm-hmm. And what I know, and I will never forget, we were sitting at a coffee shop at Grey Dog, News Bar Cafe.
News Bar.
And we decided to invest, and I just absolutely loved your vision. And you had said, Alexa, I hope you go, one day I'm going to make it so that you wish you gave me $10 million today, not the maybe 5 that we gave you. And that really sat with me. And I know that you truly feel like you're in inning 1 here. Let's talk a little bit about, where do you want the company to be in a decade? Yeah. What does this look like? We get the ingredients, which is business model. Actually, your business model gets better when you're public, which is a pretty unique unlock. There are ample companies. You have really no competitors, and you have an incredible core team that is so
A
focus.
great team.
You have the
Very
most incredible, you have the best two co-founders as well that the three of you really are like brothers in some way. That's very much how
definitely.
we've thought about
I call it a marriage, actually. It's a very, like, we've been through a lot.
it. So what does the next decade look like, Michael? Where are we going to go?
Yeah. So I think actually just like on that point, right? So like the reason why I've always had just like and this ties into the question too, right? So like why I've always had conviction about raising capital for TeamShares is I know what we can deliver. The main risk in TeamShares, as far as I see it, maybe not the list of all the risks in the prospectus, but just as human to human, when I always think about like what's the risk of TeamShares, it's usually that things take longer than we hoped. That's what I found over and over again is that, but we've always had conviction that the market's there, that we want to do this, for the rest of our careers. We really believe in what we're doing. And so that's why we've always had a high conviction that when we go to raise capital from people that it's not some like, oh, we'll hope this works out sort of, institutional philosophy. It's like we view it as these are like relationships that we're building from investors that's taking capital, whether it's their own or money they're managing, right? And that we have a fiduciary and like a moral obligation to do our best to build returns and, for the investors we take on capital. So that's where that strong belief has come from. And I would say it remains today because now we're at this point that's really interesting where we're right at the point where the company is approaching free cash flow break even. That's been challenging, obviously, to build a profitable but free cash flow negative business due to interest, right? So we're now at the point where we're approaching the public markets, free cash flow break even. Our pipeline of companies remains as robust as ever. And in fact, now that we have this new tool of businesses sort of up to 5 million of EBITDA over the long run, it helps at a minimum sort of ensure that we can, meet the sorts of targets that we've set out to meet and maybe in the long term more. And then we've got hopefully these capital catalysts on the debt and the equity side. So we've put out a forecast right over the next 2 years, right, to say, okay, we want to get to from 19 million of corporate EBITDA in 2025 to 100 or more in 2027. And in that forecast, we say, it'll be sort of adding up to 50 million of EBITDA in 2027. So we haven't put out any sort of like specific guidance beyond that period. But what I can say is that we've always set up TeamShares to be a really repeatable engine. And so we think about 2027 as a year that we would hope to be able to repeat indefinitely if the market conditions are there. And then the other thing we've set in a sort of non-time bound, going back to that sort of 200-year vision, is that we really want to do this for thousands of businesses, right? We have a specific number internally that's really lofty, but almost would sound ludicrous, right, externally. So we just think about like, hey, thousands of businesses. We're not in a rush to get there. We want to build this is not a roll up. Like a roll up is where you buy things together really quickly, smash things together, and sell it, right? This is a very durable business, right? That is full of very high quality businesses that were great on their own and that are now part of a diversified holding company. And the cash flow is the sort of lifeblood of the whole organization. And so for us, it's different than in other types of acquisition-based models where you're building to sell quickly or you're buying one company, you're going to sell it quickly. It leads to different behaviors and different decisions. Every decision we make is over a very, very ultra long time period. Including the fact that when we take on a company, we don't try and force it to grow in the first year. We know that growth is going to happen more naturally. So that's the goal. It's a journey from here to thousands of companies. And, I don't know if it's the top of the first or the bottom of the first, but it's still the first inning. So.
Michael, what can you tell us about the process of going public? I know you have some really incredible investors like T. Rowe Price that have stepped up.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have them involved.
They are very long-term, very discerning and very long-term investors. What else can you tell us about this next month?
We publicly filed our S4, which is the registration statement that talks a lot about the transaction and TeamShares and Live Oak, who's our partner in going public. And we have our Investor Day, which we had just done last week on the 31st of March. So that content's now out there. You can watch the recording and you can watch, I think of that as almost like the onboarding material for a public investor to get to know TeamShares, it's a lengthy, a 90-page deck, but it's actually a quick read and a 90-minute sort of presentation that any investor can really get up to speed on TeamShares, fairly quickly. Going back to the rest of the process, it's really to complete our registration statement, and then the transaction will conclude at some point in the second quarter, and will be publicly traded under ticker TMS. So.
I love it, TMS. As you go public, you made the decision to reinvest your equity. And I know you're someone over time who's invested on phases throughout the company, your own dollars. I also did this back in the day at LearnVest, so I very much respect it. Say more.
Yeah. So we agreed voluntarily, actually we proposed, no one asked us, we actually proposed to do a 4-year lockup of all our existing equity. And the reason is we just wanted to give people being investors, right, confidence that this is not an exit for us. Because I think some of the worry when a company goes public, especially at a small size, right, there's a lot of investors, the new investors, the public investors are trying to figure out, is this, hey, like this didn't go well and you're just kind of trying to get it off your books, or is this like, sort of something with a future, right? And so we wanted to very clearly demonstrate to the market our unusual level of skin in the game. So we agreed to a 4-year lockup. It's actually technically the sooner of 4 years, or the stock price trading at $25 versus the 10 where it starts. But either way, it's a meaningful piece of skin in the game. The 5 people in the executive team combined, we're investing $1 million of our own cash, and we're on reasonably modest salaries, right? So it's a meaningful contribution from us. And we've invested before, and hope to continue to invest in the future, and just be really long-term holders of the company, because it's something that we just, again, have this utmost confidence that it's hard for us to promise exact weekly timing of TeamShares, but we know over a multi-year and multi-decade and hopefully multi-century view that TeamShares is going to be a bigger company in the future than it is today. So.
Michael, one of the things that you and I do share in common is that we really, at our core, are long-term investors in how we think about our time, our effort, our life. Again, going back to that 200-year plan that you took the time years ago to actually write down, I want to ask a practical question, which is, how does that actually change your day-to-day when you're making a tough decision that requires some short-term thinking? How does that scaffolding of you're in inning 1, this is not inning 7 for you, this is inning 1 of again, a multi many decade thinking project. What benefit does that give you and your team?
Yeah. So it does a couple things. I mean, a couple of concrete examples that come to mind. So one is that, whatever we're weighing in as a group, so we meet daily to look at the acquisition funnel. And one of the questions I always ask myself is like, do I think this business will be around in 50 years? Right? And that has to be yes. It's one of a number of sort of necessary but not sufficient questions that, when I'm one of 4 voters, to take on a new company. And that's a question I ask myself. And so it means that we turn down companies where we're not highly confident. We don't have a crystal ball, but I think hopefully you can use your intuition to figure out like, okay, well, odds are people will be eating hamburgers in 50 years, and maybe the mix of meat and non-meat changes, but people will be eating, right? So I think that that's one thing, is that we turn away opportunities where we don't know that there is sort of like a ultimate, sort of evergreen nature to the business. I think it's part of how we approach the first year of the transition, right? A lot of investors, whether public or private, right, are understandably, they sort of say, like, well, like how quickly can you grow the company the first year? And we say, well, and a lot of people don't really know the SME space very well. So if you try, at least I came into that in 2013 and bought a business and thought, let's grow right away. And what happens is when you do that, you can really kind of disrupt the existing customer base if you come in and make a lot of changes right away. And you kind of want to build the support naturally and organically. And the support is there because, in TeamShares model, we bring in employees as equity partners in the company. So that builds naturally, but first you have to build trust, and oftentimes we have to upgrade the systems, right? And take these companies. So I would say it's sort of embedded in our ability to kind of go slowly, to build sort of growth over time, but not rush into it, because you need to, again, take care of the business. And I think it's even like at a company level, we've done some like unintuitive things over time. So we set this headcount cap years ago, following the Dunbar principle. Said we're never going to have more than 150 people, right, at the parent company. We're 90 today. We were bigger at one point, and that just came for a whole bunch of sort of strategic and business and innovation reasons. We didn't want to have a huge headcount at the parent. It seems really big to the outside world today, but it's like we have 2 investment associates processing 1,500 companies a year, right? So it's actually, each team is very, very nimble. And even actually, I think Alex, Kevin, and I we've not had many fights, but one of the fights we had early on was about KPIs. And Alex had genuine concerns in the back of a well-known bank that led to some really bad decision making based on sort of KPIs and metrics and stuff. And so we had this sort of heated debate about how to do OKRs and KPIs the right way, that don't lead to downstream decisions, ripple effects 20, 40, 50 years from now. And so so we think a lot about the culture of TeamShares, and making sure that we're trying to build TeamShares at the parent company in a sustainable way that allows the cultures of the companies we take on as our partner companies, right, to exist in a sustainable way with their own cultures too. So
I love that. And as we both know, culture certainly eats strategy for breakfast. And so I respect just the major focus on it. I'm going to transition to just some questions of things that you can pay forward to other people.
Sure.
But I want to say one thing as your friend. I'm so proud of the work that you're doing with TeamShares, as they're in a world where obviously AI is happening everywhere, and AI of course impacts your business in really good ways because it can make a lot of things really efficient. Our team here at Inspired has always said, you're digitizing the small business economy, which is a third of the US economy. And you're taking really important businesses that we all need, plumbing businesses, electrician businesses, those aren't going anywhere, right? And you're doing this incredible good to basically really digitize a part of the economy that no one else is. That's a pretty great reason for everybody on the TeamShares team is so passionate about their job. But I feel that as an investor, I feel that as your teammate, that must be pretty great to be able to have a business that's genuinely unlocking such good in the world.
Yeah, it is. I think because we're doing it in a way where everyone wins. I think of it as like the retiring owner who built the business and slept on a couch, right, to sort of get it off the ground. They win first, right, because they built the business, they own the business, they took all the risk, and then TeamShares sort of wins second, if you will, because we sort of put up all the capital to buy the business, and we bring in employees as equity partners, and then if the business is able to produce and grow and everything, then the employees really win over time too. So we think of it as sort of win-win-win. And then I think then there's like the intellectual nature of it. It's really, what we do hasn't really been done before in the exact same way, right? And so there are definitely certainly programmatic acquirers. There are many, so probably 30 programmatic acquirers of sort of slightly larger companies across a range of industries. But taking on companies kind of this size in a diversified way and in such a tech-enabled way, that hadn't been done before. And I think that is something that I think is really intellectually interesting too. Because even if you look at the people that, we have a team of people that build software at TeamShares, right? And we don't try and build software that already exists. So like we would never try and build something competitive with Toast, because Toast exists and it's great, right? So we'll have the company switch out into Toast. We build the sort of horizontal layer at the parent company that helps us acquire the companies confidently and then run them confidently and see all the numbers of the businesses. And so you've got this intersection where you've got, say, like an accounting team that's all sort of big four, and then an engineering team that's come from really great companies, right? And they say, like, look, I've done these sort of large technical at scale, minutia problems. I want to take my skill set, I want to apply it to the real economy. And that's what's really interesting. I think the intellectual component of TeamShares of like, how do you take these skill sets out of these other great companies and bring them and then apply this into this new way to create, a tech-enabled factory. And it's a factory that has deep relationships with our stakeholders too, but we have to be able to move a company through in a cost-effective and efficient manner from start to finish.
I love that, and the repeatability that you are maniacally focused on, I feel like is a real strength. I'm going to transition to our quickfire, but I want to cover one topic, which is, Michael, in just the last 6-ish years, you guys have had such interesting market environments that have been tumultuous. As I said, we invested right as you were going into COVID, and obviously that changes a lot for small business, as we know. Then a couple of years later, you were hit with the shock of 2022 and 2023, rising rates, capital tightening very quickly. You've really been through a lot. What have you learned about being a stable set of hands through truly external shockwaves?
So what have I learned? Great question. That they're going to come every year or two. At least that's been the pattern of and I started my career in 06. So, I think they were a little more spaced out back then, right? You had sort of, from 08 until later, there was a longer recovery period, but it seems like they have become very frequent, that sort of every 2 years we have some sort of like great question mark or some sort of disruption. So I think one is to learn to expect it. And then I think actually this is partially the job of leadership, to be steady hands, and heavy hangs the head, and I think that's part of our job, is to be a buttress and to absorb that stress and that pressure, right, and be very long-term minded, so that when something happens, you need to sort of do these two things that sound like they're in conflict at the same time. You need to be aware of what's going on and have really good situational awareness, but when something bad happens, you need to not panic. Right? You need to always think about what's happened over the long term, what do we need to do, what's changed, but you need to be really, really steady and stable. And so I just think that that's just part of going through lots of different economic cycles and environments, and it helps. It's a version of compounding. It's sort of like leadership compounding. So
I love it. All right, I want to run through some of your best tips, and we're going to start with, what's a book that shaped you? It can be anything, doesn't have to be a business book, but a book that you recommend everybody read for their life.
That is a great question. On the business side, the book that I think for sort of business people, whether you're a startup or whether you're running like a oil and gas services business, anything, I think that actually a great way to learn how to just run a business day to day is a book called Traction by a guy named Gino Wickman, and he just wrote this book on sort of how it was basically a marketing tool for their consulting business, but it's just really, really simple way to break down sort of running, businesses. I think that I like a lot of sort of history books and biographies, and so I really like Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs. I thought that it was really fascinating, and he's a complicated person, but I think it was really cool to read sort of the in-depth story of of Apple and of him. So
I love that book too. What's a mantra that kind of runs in the background of your mind?
Everything is workable. I remember, I don't know where I saw it, but I saw it, and that I didn't have a mantra before that. But I think it goes back, it relates to your question like a couple of minutes ago. That's the mantra. That's it. Everything is workable. You get dealt a different hand. Okay, so you got to adjust, right? And so if you have conviction in what you're doing, right, everything is workable.
In some ways, Michael, that is your superpower, which is that you have such crazy conviction in what you're building that it makes everything actually easy. That is actually one of the superpowers. It just hit me that you have more conviction than most founders in your future. And it actually makes weathering storms easy.
Yeah, that's right.
So many more questions. When a problem feels really big, how do you break it down? Just give us how do you process big problems?
Yeah. So it depends on the nature of the problem. So we have a phrase, I don't know where the phrase comes from. I think it might be an engineering phrase called rubber ducking. But basically sometimes you just need to talk out loud. So it depends on the nature. So there's versions of problems that are hey, this is kind of like a quick decision, I'm overcomplicating it. And that's a good sort of rubber duck where you just sort of talk to a peer or a colleague or someone like that and sort of think through it. If you're trying to build out something that you're we're really reviewing our strategy for X, for our software, for our financing, whatever, I'm actually like a big fan of getting in a room and actually like just whiteboarding and like taking a couple of days if it's that important a sort of decision or set of decisions you're making. I really like having multiple stakeholders with multiple viewpoints and getting in a room. And then I think then if it's a sort of a project, right? I think that's classic project management of breaking things down into phases, right? And knowing, I think you got to sort of, I mean, the process of going public was a very good example. We started that process sort of like last June, right? It's going to take sort of almost a year, right, to complete. And so you sort of need to know, okay, what's the arc of all the phases? But like you don't need to know in phase 5 the minutia of everything. You just sort of need to squint and say, okay, that's what it's going to look like, I think, when you get there. And over the next sort of 2 months, here's all the steps we have to do, and here's who's going to own each step, and have a good structure for sort of project management around it. So I don't know. Those are the sorts of things that come to mind for me.
By the way, you and I share in common that I love being locked in a room, whiteboarding a problem out, and
Absolutely.
and not leaving until you figure it out. That is one of the things I always liked about being in person.
It's also a great thing for if you ever have to get into a negotiation. I think it's a really, because obviously like when we buy the businesses, we have to go through sort of, a negotiation and thankfully sort of venture docs are pretty straightforward and pretty standardized, right? There's not a lot of that in venture financing, but I've found that if you get to some sort of set of key issues on a transaction, getting on a plane and going in person and just saying like, we're gonna get in a room for a day, we're gonna sort all these things out, works very well.
By the way, it's old school. It's really effective. Works a lot.
Well, it means the other, at a minimum, they're not like, on their second screen doing Slack or multitasking. So you have each other's full attention. So.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. What would you say is one of the most unique small businesses you've encountered?
Unique. Oh, wow, we've seen a lot. So I'll give you a lighthearted one and a grim one. So we saw an onion packing plant in Idaho that only made money when the price of onions was at a certain price. And so it was dead on arrival because it was like zero profit, 3 million, 1 million, -1. It was so bizarre. But that was by far the most volatile. We also saw a business we've seen 2 businesses that have one customer, which is really interesting. I'll give the morbid one. This one it was one that was an interesting case study of like a good business that we didn't take on. So it was a business that was in the space of actually like cleaning up after violent acts and stuff like that.
Wow.
And so, right, of course, wow, right. So if you think about that and detach yourself and emotionally, like, oh, that's a service that needs to exist. Like that's a traumatic experience for everyone who's just sort of involved in that. And so that service has to exist, right? But when we thought it through the lens of TeamShares, and it was a good business financially, but we thought about it through the lens of TeamShares, like I don't think that there was no ethical issues or anything like that. It was more just like I don't see us being able to hire and retain a president. It's like growing that business just felt weird inside of a corporation. And so that was an example. That was a very, very unusual business. But we closely look at 1,500 per year. So we've seen the full gamut. So.
1,500 per year. There we go. Few more quick things. What's one piece of advice you'd give any founder that's listening based on what you've learned being in the seat?
Have conviction and don't give up. I think the thing is you have to don't start a business to make $1 million or 2 million or 3 million. Like just don't do it. Just like work at McKinsey or Google or Morgan Stanley. Like don't do it if that's your goal. There are so many better and easier ways to go and try and create financial independence in starting a company. You need to start a company. Like you'll just know if you need to start one because it should feel, I think, like a bucket list item. And then I think you've got to wait for the right time. Like I had it on my bucket list to start a company, right? And after I started a company, it didn't feel like it was like the right company, right? And so I think that, and that right company became TeamShares. It took many years of trial and error of sort of other things that just didn't work along the way, right? And so I think that you need to wait for the right time. You need to have real conviction in what you're doing. It has to have fulfillment. I don't love the word passion, but I really like the word fulfillment. That it's something that you would do for free anyway, right? And it's something that you really think is productive for society and not some short-term gimmick. I think that is the best way to go and sort of build a business. Or honestly, there are just way easier things to do. There's an expression of like, startup founders or people that, quit a job to sort of work twice the hours, right? And it's kind of true. So
I'm like only smiling because it's just,
because you're intimately familiar.
it's so, I always say it's just so emblematic of an inspired founder. It's somebody who wants to change the world for decades, and it has nothing to do with being a CEO. And you are that to your core. Which brings me to my last fun question, which is, what has been the biggest pinch me moment to date? For TeamShares, what was the day where you went home and looked at your wife and were like, this happened? Yeah. Can you believe it? What's one that stands out?
Yeah, there's a couple. I definitely remember we had an on-site. So we built the company in COVID really. So we made that decision to be national and be distributed. And it's worked out really well because the companies are national. So it means we have people all over the country and close to the companies, which is great. But then we would do. I think we sort of were inspired from Zapier of doing so twice a year in-person on-sites, both for culture building and kind of business planning. And the first couple were pretty small and they were really, really, really fun. I think the first one, like everyone gave a toast. It was that small, right? Actually, the first one, it might have been a lunch, right? But like there was one where we were at a WeWork in Williamsburg or something, and there were 80 people in the room. And I think all three of us had this like, how did I get here sort of moment while that was happening. Actually, I will say, as sort of cheesy in a way as some of the bell ringing photos are, when I walked into the Nasdaq, we did our investor day at the Nasdaq the other day, like I was kind of welling up walking in there. I was like, wow, and I've known this day is coming since the day we started it, and we've started this process sort of last summer and fall, working with our advisors and all that stuff, writing a prospectus and getting comments at the SEC, even despite all those activities and planning, and that this was always sort of the graduation from college phase. I will say that like walking through there and seeing all those bell ringing photos, that was a bit of a pinch me moment of like, oh wow, this is happening. Hopefully in a couple of weeks. So,
well, I think it's an understatement to say that we are rooting for you. I hope every founder listening to this gets to see truly what a long-term thinker you guys are and have been. I know we're in inning one. And I can't wait to see, as your partner in a decade, where we are. And I have a feeling that in a decade, we may say that we're still in inning one. And so
you never know. It's like one of those things where it's similar to like the more you learn and the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that some people even saw this, even though we had a big vision. We had sort of early employees that even sort of saw certain parts of it being even bigger before we caught up. And then sort of came to really grapple with like, oh, really is going to be a big company. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey.
Well, I can't wait. And Michael, thank you for entrusting me on your journey. I've had such a great time, and I can't wait for this next decade. And best of luck.
Yeah, thanks to you and Mark and the entire Inspired team. So
we're rooting for you. Let's go. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate, review, subscribe. We'll be back again with another episode of Inspired with Alexa Von Tobel. Thank you.